They're kind of doing some drills here. Let's see them cook up for a little bit. Chelsea, no look. Caitlin, side dribble. Main thing is they're enjoying themselves, man. I love it. Okay, Angel to Stu, easy work. It seems like Caitlin is hanging with Kelsey a lot. Paige always yelling. Paige yelling about anything these days.
Imagine generating over $1 billion in brand value. Imagine selling out every arena you step into, breaking every viewership record in the history of your sport, and single-handedly rescuing an entire league from 30 years of financial obscurity. Now imagine collecting a paycheck so small it would barely cover rent in a mid-sized American city. That is not a hypothetical. That is the documented, verifiable financial reality of Caitlin Clark's life inside the WNBA right now. In 2026, the most electrifying basketball player on the planet, the woman who injected billions into a league that was surviving only on NBA charity, will earn $86,873 from the Indiana Fever. Let that land for a second. $86,000. The average American public school teacher earns more than that. Entry-level software engineers in Austin earn more than that. The person being paid to manage social media for a mid-market car dealership earns more than Caitlin Clark earns from the WNBA. And while that staggering, almost offensive number sits quietly on Clark's contract, the entire broken economic architecture of women's professional basketball is now violently collapsing in on itself. 16 months of failed negotiations, a strike authorization vote that passed at 98%, leaked letters from the union's own vice presidents, a March 10th deadline that puts the entire 2026 season in jeopardy, and one young woman from Ames, Iowa, who is executing the most quietly devastating corporate power move in the modern history of professional sports.
Special for you. Man, I think, this is every kid's dream. I think I wrote it down when I was in like 3rd grade. So just excited about this opportunity. And I remember Kara Callan talking to us, like when me and Paige, and I know AB isn't here, but even I played with Ryan on the U19 team. Like on the junior national teams, there's only going to be like a couple of you that end up making it to make a senior debut. So whether that's the World Cup, whether the World Cup qualifier, whether that's, the Olympics, every single part of it and part of the journey is really special. So I know we're a ways away even from the World Cup and obviously a ways away from the Olympics, but this is still really exciting in itself. And
if you want the full picture, the real numbers, the billionaire power plays, and the calculated escape route that just changed the entire leverage dynamic of this negotiation, you need to stay here from beginning to end. And before we get into it, if this is the kind of unfiltered financial breakdown you've been looking for instead of the corporate spin and the sanitized press releases, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This is where the real conversation happens. The number that should embarrass everyone. Let us start with the contract. Caitlin Clark signed a 4-year rookie deal with Indiana worth a total of $338,000. Over the entirety of her current agreement, she will earn less than a single game check for the average NBA player. In 2026 alone, her WNBA base salary comes in at $86,873, a figure that will be outpaced by bonuses, per diems, and miscellaneous travel compensation for players on multiple other professional sports rosters around the world. Now here is the contrast that makes this number almost physically difficult to process. Nike reportedly signed Clark to an 8-year endorsement deal worth in the neighborhood of $28 million. Gatorade is aligned with her. State Farm built national television campaigns around her product, GameBridge. The brand equity Clark has accumulated is measured not in thousands, but in hundreds of millions of dollars by people who make it their full-time job to value these things. When she walked into the Indiana Fever organization as a rookie, ticket prices around the league spiked anywhere from 40 to 500% depending on the market. The new television deal, widely reported at approximately $2 billion, materialized with Clark's arrival as the primary catalyst. Television networks paid a premium specifically because she was in the building. And the WNBA itself, the direct, institutional beneficiary of every single dollar Clark generated on that floor, was cutting her a check for $76,535 in year one of her career. The current Supermax contract in the WNBA pays a maximum of approximately $249,000. In the NBA, a veteran minimum contract player who barely logs minutes earns more than that in a single week. The economic canyon between what elite WNBA players generate for their organizations and what they are legally permitted to receive from those same organizations is the structural time bomb that has been ticking underneath women's professional basketball for 30 years. The explosion is happening right now, in real time, as the 2026 season hangs in the balance. The CBA disaster you're watching unfold did not arrive without warning. The players opted out of their existing collective bargaining agreement back in 2024, giving both sides more than enough time to negotiate a new framework before the 2026 season was ever in jeopardy. What followed was one of the most prolonged, publicly embarrassing labor standoffs in recent sports history. The original expiration deadline passed. An extension was agreed to. That extension expired. Another extension was negotiated. That one expired too. The existing CBA officially expired at the end of the 2025 season with no replacement agreement in place, no clear path forward, and a negotiating table that had spent over a year producing almost nothing of substance. Both sides ran through the same proposals and counter-proposals in an endless loop, with the gap between their positions barely narrowing despite months of virtual meetings, mediators, and public posturing. The dysfunction reached its most visible, most damaging moment in early March when a 3-page letter authored by Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart, two of the biggest names in the entire sport, found its way to ESPN. Addressed to WNBA Executive Director Terry Jackson, the letter raised alarms about insufficient player involvement in the negotiation process and highlighted the catastrophic damage a work stoppage could inflict on the league's financial future. Read that again. Two of the union's own vice presidents were so troubled by what was happening inside the negotiation that they put their concerns in writing, and that document ended up in the national media. The executive committee rushed out a statement emphasizing unity, reaffirming the nearly unanimous December strike authorization vote, and pledging to continue fighting for a deal that benefits all members. The messaging was controlled. The optics were not. The world could now see exactly how fractured the internal coalition actually was. To understand why 16 months of negotiation produced almost nothing, you need to understand what each side is actually asking for. Because the gap between their positions is not a matter of minor adjustment. It is a fundamental disagreement about the value of labor itself. The players entered these negotiations having watched the WNBA sign a television deal worth approximately $2 billion, a number that would have been unimaginable just 5 years ago. The union's initial position asked for 31% of gross revenue to be allocated to player salaries. They later reduced that demand to 27.5%, and most recently came down further to approximately 26%. They also pushed hard for expanded housing guarantees, higher minimum salaries, improved retirement benefits, parental leave for non-birthing parents, training facility standards, and roster expansion. The league's most recent counter-offer proposed 70% of net revenue over the life of the deal and a first-year salary cap of $5.65 million. Which would theoretically push average player salaries to approximately $540,000. The minimum salary under the league's framework would also increase substantially from the current $66,000 floor. On paper, $540,000 sounds like a dramatic improvement, and it is compared to the current structure, but it still represents a fraction of what NBA players earn. It still means the most valuable player in the sport earns less from the league itself than a mid-tier role player in most European basketball leagues earns in salary plus benefits. And critically, it still means that the revenue-sharing percentage the players receive falls far below the 48 to 50% of revenues that NBA and NFL players successfully negotiated for themselves. The owners are willing to increase the numbers. They're not willing to give up structural control over where most of the money goes. And that fundamental tension is what has kept this negotiation deadlocked for a year and a half. The most strategically important thing the veteran establishment ever did was create the unrivaled 3-on-3 league. And the most brutally revealing thing that ever happened to them was watching it fail on a national broadcast. Unrivaled was conceived as a high-quality basketball product featuring established WNBA stars, competing in an innovative format with real production value and a legitimate television partner. The underlying strategy was straightforward and actually quite clever. Demonstrate to owners, sponsors, and network executives that elite women's basketball players possess independent market value. Prove that the casual audience that discovered women's basketball over the last 2 seasons came for the sport itself, not just for a single player. Build the evidence base that gives the union maximum leverage at the bargaining table. The ratings did not cooperate. Viewership numbers for Unrivaled's debut were disappointing by any reasonable measure. They did not stabilize. The American sports consumer, who had shown genuine, enthusiastic interest in women's basketball over the previous 18 months, tuned in for a few minutes, noticed a specific jersey number was not on the floor, and moved on to something else. The casual fan did not care deeply enough about women's basketball in the abstract to watch an entire league built around established veterans who had spent years playing in relative anonymity. They cared about one specific, singular, irreplaceable thing that Unrivaled could not provide. TNT Sports, which had made significant investments in the product, found itself staring at numbers that did not justify the bet. The veterans had played their most powerful card. The market had evaluated the hand, and the market had folded. Worse, franchise-caliber players, including Aaliyah Boston, one of the league's most skilled and respected players, suffered serious injuries in what amounted to exhibition games for a struggling property. The physical and financial liabilities of the experiment ended up far outweighing any negotiating value it generated. The billionaire owners on the other side of the bargaining table no longer needed economists or television analysts to make their argument about relative market value. They could simply pull up the Unrivaled ratings and let the data speak for itself. The March 10th ultimatum and the strike everyone claims not to want. On February 22nd, the WNBA delivered what the sports business world recognized immediately as a pressure drop moment. The league formally notified the union and all team personnel that a new collective bargaining agreement needed to be in place by March 10th, or the 2026 season would begin to be disrupted. Not delayed weeks or months down the road, disrupted. The May 8th opening of the league's 30th season, the season that was supposed to cash in on Clark's historic first year and the arrival of the new television money, suddenly had a question mark next to it. The timing was not accidental. This was the first hard deadline the league had imposed in 16 months of negotiations. It was a signal that the ownership class had exhausted its patience for a process that was generating nothing but negative headlines and labor uncertainty for a league trying to pitch itself to global sponsors and television partners as a stable, growing, premium sports property. The union responded to the March 10th deadline with a public statement reaffirming solidarity. But the math underneath that statement told a different story. 80% of the league's players were sitting at home without active contracts, waiting for a deal to be finalized before they could sign. Agents across the league were pressing for resolution. Younger players, the ones without substantial endorsement income to cushion a work stoppage, were quietly expressing anxiety about a situation where union leadership appeared to be prioritizing a political standoff over the practical financial reality facing the majority of the membership. ESPN reported that several players were privately urging the executive committee to find a path to a deal rather than risk the financial consequences of a blown season. The near-unanimous strike authorization vote from December gave the 7-member executive committee the authority to call a work stoppage whenever they deemed it necessary. That power was real, but power and wisdom are not always the same thing, and the players sitting without paychecks at home, watching the March 10th deadline approach, we're increasingly aware of the difference. Here is the dimension of the WNBA's labor standoff that receives the least analytical attention despite being arguably the most important structural fact of the entire situation. The league is no longer owned and operated by the cautious, financially conservative institutional establishment of the past. The WNBA has been invaded by billionaires, and these are not passive investors who wrote a check for the tax write-off. These are some of the most aggressive, analytically sophisticated sports business operators in the world. The new ownership class includes figures connected to Golden State Warriors ownership, Mark Walter, who controls the Los Angeles Dodgers and Chelsea Football Club, and Matt Ishbia, the billionaire owner of both the Phoenix Mercury and the Phoenix Suns, among others. The entry prices paid for ownership stakes in WNBA franchises in recent years represent premiums that simply did not make financial sense until Caitlin Clark's arrival made the league's growth trajectory look like a genuine long-term investment opportunity. These are people who model scenarios, run valuations, stress test assumptions. They did not pay those prices without doing the math. And the math they did was heavily dependent on one fundamental assumption. Caitlin Clark would be in the WNBA, healthy, competitive, and driving the revenue engine for the next decade. The investment thesis for the entire ownership group is built around her presence in the league, which means the actual leverage equation in this negotiation is almost perfectly backwards from how the union is presenting it publicly. The owners cannot afford to lose Clark from the WNBA ecosystem. The owners cannot afford to have their league's best asset so disenchanted with the environment that she finds alternative platforms more appealing. And Clark, methodically, quietly, without a single confrontational word, is currently demonstrating to every single one of them exactly what it would look like if she played basketball somewhere else. The escape hatch that changed the entire calculation. In February, USA Basketball Managing Director Sue Bird named Caitlin Clark to the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying roster. Alongside her, Angel Reese making her senior national team debut. Paige Buchers, the most anticipated WNBA draft prospect in years, stepping onto the international stage for the first time. Olympic gold medalists Kelsey Plum and Chelsea Gray. A roster that read less like a qualifying team and more like a preview of the next decade of American basketball dominance. The qualifying tournament was scheduled for March 11th through 17th in San Juan, Puerto Rico, with Team USA going in as heavy favorites against Spain, Italy, Puerto Rico, and additional opponents. The Americans had already secured their spot at the World Cup, coming in September in Berlin, when a Kara Lawson-coached squad of college players won the AmeriCup the previous summer. This qualifying tournament was officially a tune-up, a preparation platform, an opportunity to evaluate younger talent before the bigger stage. But to the television networks, to the sponsors, to the global basketball audience that had been waiting since Clark's last meaningful game to watch her play again, this was not a tune-up. This was an event. In TNT Sports, the exact same network that had watched the unrivaled ratings collapse without Clark had positioned itself to broadcast it. The network that proved beyond reasonable doubt that the veterans could not move the commercial needle without number 22 had simply reallocated its attention and its resources to wherever Caitlin Clark was going to be. No anger, no loyalty to the old format, pure market logic. While the WNBA's March 10th deadline was generating maximum drama and uncertainty in the business press, Clark was boarding a flight to Miami for Team USA's pre-tournament training camp. She was preparing for high-stakes, nationally broadcast, internationally celebrated basketball. She was operating entirely outside the WNBA's labor dispute, entirely outside the jurisdiction of the WNBPA's executive committee, and entirely beyond the reach of any work stoppage threat. Her platform did not require the WNBA's permission. Her audience did not wait for the WNBA CBA to be resolved before showing up. The escape hatch was open, and she had walked through it with the same quiet professionalism and total lack of drama that has defined every major move of her career. There is a generational story running underneath this entire dispute, one that the sports media has danced around without fully committing to stating directly. The veteran players who built the WNBA through its 3 decades of financial struggle have legitimate, deeply felt grievances. Playing through seasons with poverty-level salaries, brutal travel arrangements, the daily experience of cultural invisibility in a sports landscape that barely acknowledged their existence. These are real sacrifices made by real athletes who gave their professional lives to a product that gave them almost nothing in return. Their desire for structural economic change is completely justified. Their anger has a foundation. No honest analysis of this situation dismisses what the veterans built or what they suffer to build it. But the current dynamic goes beyond economic negotiation. The arrival of Caitlin Clark exposed something in the veteran establishment that multiple observers, multiple journalists, and multiple agents connected to the league have described in broadly consistent terms. A faction of veteran leadership that found Clark's overnight transformation of the league's economics and cultural profile threatening rather than celebratory. A locker room hierarchy that expected deference and received a 22-year-old who already had 10 times the endorsement income of her most senior teammates. An old guard that had spent 2 decades telling the public that women's basketball was undervalued. And then, when a market violently confirmed that argument in the form of Caitlin Clark, struggled to welcome the validation because of who it arrived with. The younger generation of players, Clark's peers, the Angel Reeses and Paige Bukers of sport, operate in a fundamentally different psychological environment. They grew up playing on massive platforms. They arrived as stars. They do not feel bound by the unwritten rules about rookie deference and veteran hierarchy. They want to play basketball, compete at the highest level, and get paid what the market actually says they are worth. Many of them have been watching the prolonged labor impasse with growing impatience, knowing that every month of delay is a month of their peak athletic years, generating no professional income whatsoever. The union's carefully worded statements about solidarity and unity were undercut by the Plum Stewart letter, undercut by anonymous agent quotes in national publications, undercut by the visible frustration of players waiting at home for a deal that leadership kept finding reasons to delay. The coalition was not as unified as the public statement suggested, and the billionaire ownership class, watching all of it from the other side of the table, knew exactly what that meant for the union's actual leverage. If a deal gets done before serious damage is inflicted on the season schedule, the outcome is straightforward. Average salaries climb dramatically toward $500,000. Housing guarantees improve, minimum salaries rise, the veteran players claim a meaningful victory. The league opens May 8. Clark and Bukers share court for the first time as professionals. And the $2 billion television era begins without a catastrophic stumble. Everyone declares some version of victory and gets on with the business of playing basketball. The momentum that makes this league suddenly worth fighting over continues to build. If the talks break down and the season gets impacted, the consequences are asymmetric in a way the union's leadership does not seem to have fully processed. The sponsors who committed to a complete 2026 season of premium women's basketball start reassessing those commitments. The television networks who paid unprecedented prices for rights fees begin asking uncomfortable questions about what they actually purchased. The new fan base, the millions of people who discovered women's basketball specifically through the Clark phenomenon and have no 30-year emotional investment in the league's labor politics, disengages. And the veteran players who pushed hardest for the work stoppage lose their paychecks, lose their cultural relevance, and watch the owners use the disruption as leverage to restructure the entire financial framework of the league on more favorable terms when the smoke finally clears. Caitlin Clark loses nothing in either scenario. In one, she opens the season as the WNBA's most valuable player under a new deal that begins to reflect the economic reality she created. In the other, she plays internationally, expands her global brand, generates enormous television numbers for TNT Sports in Puerto Rico and Berlin, and returns to whatever version of the WNBA exists when the adults have finished arguing. Her market value does not diminish. Her audience does not go anywhere. Her leverage, if anything, increases the longer the league's dysfunction continues. The 30-year history of the WNBA is a story about a product that was always more valuable than the economic structures around it were willing to acknowledge. The players who built it deserve better. The current generation of players deserves dramatically better. The new television deal, the new ownership money, and the commercial transformation driven by Caitlin Clark's arrival finally created the conditions where dramatically better was actually possible. Whether the March 10th deadline produced a deal or produced more chaos, Whether the 2026 season opens on schedule or limps into existence under a cloud, the fundamental commercial reality of women's basketball has been permanently altered. The salary that pays Clark $86,000 to generate hundreds of millions in value will not survive the new economic era. The question is only whether it changes through a negotiated agreement that treats the players as genuine partners in the billion-dollar future they built, or through a brutal post-conflict restructuring that leaves everyone worse off than where they started. And through all of it, Clark keeps doing exactly what she has always done. She plays basketball. She wins. She smiles. She talks about dreaming of this moment in third grade and how every step of the journey is something to be grateful for. She steps onto the international stage in Puerto Rico with Team USA and gives the global audience exactly what it came to see, while the league that benefits most from her existence figures out whether it is capable of getting out of its own way long enough to survive its own success. The sport has never been at a more critical moment. The money has never been more real. And the most important person in the entire ecosystem is playing basketball in Puerto Rico, completely untouchable, completely joyful, and completely unbothered by the fire behind her. Think about that. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you believe the WNBA gets this deal done and the season starts on time? Or does the whole thing fall apart and the veteran establishment triggers the most expensive cell phone in the history of women's sports? And with Clark about to put up numbers on the international stage, how big do you think those FIBA qualifying ratings are going to be? If this is the kind of unapologetic, financially grounded sports coverage you've been looking for, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video. We follow the money. We expose the real dynamics. We tell the full story that most people are too cautious or too cozy with the lead to tell. See you in the next one.